Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. This channel is dedicated to bringing you scary stories. As always, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel a lot and helps me keep creating this content. Alright, here's the stories. This didn't happen to me, but I was involved in it. The victim was actually my girlfriend, and I got the story later. At the time, my girlfriend and I were attending college together. It was a smaller school in a pretty quiet place, so most of the students were from the area. My girlfriend Katie was one of those. I came from a distance, and so I lived in a dorm at the college. Katie and I would hang out together in my dorm between classes, and even some evenings and weekends when we wanted to be together but didn't feel like going out. It was a Friday night, and both of us were pretty introverted and decided not to do anything crazy, so we just planned to spend the night in my room with each other as my roommate was out that night. She wanted some time to go home after classes and assured me that she'd be back around 8 o'clock. Katie had a car, but she never liked driving. Unless she had to pack around her instrument, she usually took the bus. That Friday night, she had a pretty unnerving experience in doing so that freaked the two of us out for a long time after it happened. She was a small girl. Definitely didn't look like a college-age student. She was short, thin, and quiet. Standing alone at the bus stop in the dark was probably not the ideal place for her, but she preferred that over taking her own car. She waited for the bus, innocent as a rose, when a van drove past her. Then again, and then again. She was a bit suspicious, but told herself he was probably just lost or killing time. The van then pulled over right in front of the stop, and the driver rolled his window down. "Isn't it cold out here?" he asked. "The bus is always late. Hop in and I'll give you a ride." Katie declined politely and took a few steps back, trying to show him she wasn't interested in anything he wanted. He asked again if she was absolutely sure that she didn't want to ride, and he drove away after she turned him down again. The bus arrived moments later, and she was relieved to step in. To her horror, then she noticed the same van was following the bus. The van followed the bus directly, and Katie texted me to explain the situation. I could tell she was panicked, which isn't uncommon for her. I offered to talk to her on the phone to calm her nerves, and she accepted. We talked about school and things to get her mind off what was happening. Once her stop came, she felt safe enough to hang up the phone and walk the short distance to the college. When she arrived at my dorm, she was hysterical. It took me over an hour to comfort her, enough to get the full story out of her, and this is what she told me. The van had stopped following the bus after getting stuck at a red light, giving the bus a chance to get ahead. However, after getting off at her stop, the van sped up to her. He was driving like a maniac at this point, going at least 20 kilometers over the speed limit. The bus had already pulled away when the van stopped next to her. It had pulled over right where she intended to go to the college, and so in a panic she bolted the other way, and the driver raced after her. When she turned her head to look behind her, she noticed that he was holding a large butcher knife and waving it in front of him in her direction. She did a wide turn to get back on track to the college. The man was following close behind. Lucky for her, he lost his footing on an icy patch in the road, and his fall delayed him enough for her to get far enough ahead. When he got back up, he didn't chase her again, but yelled out, "I will find you, and I will get you." Since then, she's always taken her car instead of the bus. In South Africa, we have a lot of hitchhikers, and for the while, the favored method to stop a car was to play dead in the road. Of course, it didn't take long for people to figure out that stopping to help people in the road is a bad idea, and that's where my friend and I joined the story. On his way home from work one night, he saw a body in the road about 1 kilometer from his house. He quickly realized what was up and decided just to drive up onto the pavement and go around the body without stopping. He got home about 2 minutes later, ran inside, and called the police. When he saw them coming down the road, he returned to where he saw the body and told them to start their search. Obviously, there was no body, but what they did find was quite surprising. 3 dead hitchhikers hiding in the long grass on the curb, as it turns out, where he had driven up on the curb to avoid the dead guy. He had crushed all of their bodies. The dead guy was never found, as far as I know. This is a true story told to me by a man who had been working as a murder investigator for 30 years at the time. I was told this story after asking what the creepiest case he had ever been involved in was. This happened in northern Scandinavia in the late 80s, in part of the country that was mostly covered by a dense pine forest. On the highway between the cities in this part of the country, you'd come across the occasional villages and secluded houses, but there are stretches that seem to go on forever, with only pine trees as far as you can see. A young girl in her early 20s was taking a motor coach home after being on a trip down south, presumably visiting friends and relatives. This happened just as winter was approaching and it was freezing outside after nightfall. This girl lived in one of those really small communities that you pass along the highway, but during the bus trip she fell asleep and missed her stop. Looking at her watch, she realized that they'd passed it only recently, and if she was to get off, she would be able to walk back in approximately 3 hours. Either that or get off at the next city where she didn't know anyone or have any place to stay. She explained this to the bus driver, who pulled off at the next parking space and let her off. And that was the last time anyone saw her. Almost 15 years later, after the long search for her had been given up, she was stumbled upon by a hiker. Her dead body was found tied to a tree, well over an hour's walk from the road into the dense, almost impassable forest. The autopsy showed no signs of physical violence of any kind. Someone had just left her there, alive. I was a pretty brave person when I was younger, or maybe I had a sense of invincibility that comes with the youth. I'd survived some things: a stalker who pursued my sister and I for over a year and a half, being sexually assaulted, 2 house fires, and growing up in a house that I swear to you was haunted. Not in that Disney way either. I'm talking about a torture chamber in the basement and strange things going on. Anyway, I suppose, looking back, that it could have been just all that made me feel like I was invincible, or maybe I just assumed I'd gotten away with all this and nothing else would happen to me. Whatever it was, I learned to know better. When I was 17, I didn't have a driver's license. I walked most places, occasionally catching rides with my friends, and less occasionally hitchhiking. The night in question was one of those seldom seen occasions where I decided to hitchhike, having worked late and being too exhausted to walk. Now, most of the time when I'd hitch a ride, I wouldn't get into a car with a lone man. Only women, or rarely a man with a wife and girlfriend and or kids in the car. This night, though, cars were hard to find and few between, and it was cold, and really, if I'm being perfectly frank, when he pulled over, I took a good look and figured I could take him if he tried anything. He was on the slender side and had a strange frailness about him, even though he looked healthy enough. I got into the car and we agreed on a destination. We exchanged names and I warmed my fingers in front of the heating vent. He spoke quietly, asking a few questions along the lines of, I was a local and how long I liked living there. He said he'd only been there a couple of months, but found it beautiful and he hoped he could find happiness there. That comment struck me as a little odd, but I brushed it off. It had begun to snow and the road quickly got slippery, so he slowed down and kept his eyes straight out on the windshield. I was okay with that. A small talk was never my forte. About 10 minutes later, I noticed the car at the intersection we were approaching seemed to be sliding, so I said, "Watch out." He immediately hit the gas, shooting through the intersection, and burst out with, "Don't ever scream at me!" Needless to say, I was taken aback. I said, "Look, this is close enough. Just pull over here and I can make it." He didn't seem to hear me. Richard, did you hear me? I said you could pull over here and let me out." No response. He just stared straight ahead, driving faster now than he had been since it had begun to snow. To say I was scared doesn't seem to cover the depth of fear that began to arise in me. I didn't know if I should stay quiet or speak, but I was damn sure not going to yell again after his last outburst. After about a mile, he began to mumble under his breath. I couldn't quite make out what he was saying, but I assumed he was speaking to me. So I said, I couldn't hear you. He began to speak quietly and rapidly, saying things like, "You're always yelling at me. I told you time and time again, I don't appreciate being yelled at. But do you listen? No. Well, I'm done listening to you now. Do you hear that?" I was at a complete loss. I didn't know what to say in response, or if I should say anything at all. I contemplated just jumping out of the car, but I nixed that idea when I realized the door lock was missing. There was just a silver-lined hole where it should have been. I started to cry and debate with myself about causing an accident by grabbing the wheel and hoping for the best. At least I figured there was a chance I'd survive that. When he suddenly looked at me, and for the first time since I'd gotten into the car, he blinked several times rapidly, then slowed the car, pulling into a gas station. I waited to see if he'd unlock the doors, not wanting to say anything to set him off again. After a minute or two, he quietly said, "I think I better let you out here," and he hit the button to open the locks. I wasn't about to hesitate. I jumped out of the car as if it was on fire. I was about to turn and walk into the gas station when he called my name. He looked so sad, and so I hesitated. He apologized and said he was sorry if he'd frightened me, and that he would never, ever have harmed me, and asked if I'd be able to get home okay. I said I would, and he closed the door. He began to pull out of the gas station lot, but stopped suddenly. He just sat there for a couple of moments, his head down. I froze, wondering what the hell he was up to and what was about to run into the gas station, but he opened his window and yelled at me, waving something in his hand. My hat. I had left it on his seat. I warily approached the side of the car and he just handed it to me, apologizing again. I didn't know what else to say, so I just said thanks. I watched as he drove off, making sure he was out of sight before moving on, so that he wouldn't know which direction I was heading. I decided to go to a friend's home instead of mine. As I walked, I went and put my hat back on, and out fell a piece of paper. Folded into the paper was a $100 bill. The paper said, "I'm sorry. Please take a cab and don't hitchhike anymore tonight." I didn't. In fact, that was the last time I'd ever hitchhiked. I used to drive I-80 between San Francisco and Cheyenne, Wyoming a lot. It's about 16 to 20 hours of driving depending on the weather and traffic and whatever. One night as I was driving, the car starts making this odd grinding noise, like I ran over something that got stuck. It's about 2 a.m. and I pull into a rest stop. Thankfully it's well lit, and I wake up my buddy who is sleeping. I explain to him as we get out of the car, we hear what sounds like a kid crying. There are no other cars at the rest stop, but we frequently heard stories about a child trafficking and kidnapping nearby, so we decided to check it out. We grab our flashlights and head towards the noise, which is coming from the bathrooms. As we get closer, we realize it's coming from the women's bathroom, and it's a low, dull sobbing. We were prepared for the worst. We walk in expecting to see some brutally beaten and or raped 8-year-old or something, and we see nothing. The sound is still there, and it's clearly coming from the room, but the room is empty. We turn on the lights, still nothing. Check each stall in the trash can, nothing. Even start looking for where in the room it's coming from, nothing. Is it a hidden speaker? Are we on camera? What the heck? My buddy climbs in one of the stalls to get the top window in the rest stop open, which is vented. He closes it and the noise stops completely. He opens it once more and there's no noise. We sit there for a few seconds staring at each other. He shrugs. Then the window slams shut again without him touching it. We were out of that bathroom in seconds. The noise starts up again 10 seconds later as we get into the car, and we're tearing out of the parking lot within another 10 seconds. The grinding noise is still there, so this time I pull over a few miles later at the Flying J truck stop, well lit, sometimes occupied. A couple of truckers are there, but no other civilians like us. We check under the car. There's a red and silver piece of metal wedged between the car and the road, about a half inch or so off the ground. So with us in the car, it would have definitely been grinding against the ground. I can't remove it by hand, it's really wedged in there, so we kick it and bend it and figure we'll remove it when we get back. A week later, I had my mechanic take it out when I was doing a service, and it was a part of a kid's tricycle, the red area on the back where someone can stand. My dad drives in Texas a lot, but there's a particular road he always avoids. I'm not sure what that road is, but he says it's in the middle of an old Native American land. One night as he was driving through, he kept seeing shadows running along the side of his trailer. Every once in a while, he would hear a huge bang as if someone was slapping the side of the trailer. He's decided to stop and see if a tire has blown because that could be the only thing making that noise. He did his usual walk around checking the tires, but as he turned the corner, he heard a laugh, and a shadow took off running down the road. Needless to say, he jumped back in the truck and didn't stop until daylight. Apparently, he saw the skinwalker standing on the side of the road with his arms crossed about 15 miles later. Thank you for listening. As always, please like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Have a good night.